Hi, everyone. I see a lot of highs in the comment. Thanks for joining in today. We'll get started since we're starting a little after 6. I'm glad to have everybody on today. We will be talking about interviews today. I have had my fair share of interviews, and we'll be focusing on that. But if you guys happen to have any other questions, definitely feel free to ask in the question box and I'll be sure to answer them. So a little bit about me. My name is Nina. I went to a Caribbean medical school, so I am an IMG. I did my internal medicine residency at Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, UPMC for internal medicine. And then I'm now doing my fellowship in pulmonary critical care. So I'm in my last year, actually interviewing for jobs as we speak. It's been a long 11-year run, but here we are. So that's exciting. In addition to myself interviewing for positions, I'm also studying for my pulmonary boards. So it's a lot going on all at once. But I did want to get on here and talk to you guys about the interview process, a little bit of how it works and how it is working, especially these days in the pandemic. There's a lot of pros and cons to how it's working in the pandemic. When I interviewed, I had one virtual interview, but the rest were in person. And this one was for a fellowship and not for residency. So residency, like I said, I went to American University of Antigua, which is a Caribbean medical school. And so I am an IMG. So coming out of that, I actually applied to like 180, maybe 200. I think it was like around 180 to 200 internal medicine residency programs because I knew that this is what I wanted to do. From that number, I ended up getting 30 something interviews. I only ended up going to 22, but I mean, that itself, just you're a med student, you have to pay for your flight, you have to pay for your Uber or your taxi, you have to pay for a place to stay if you don't know people. So it gets very expensive. I have to say that's one thing that that's changed with these pandemic interviews. With the pandemic interviews, it's just online. So it's like we could be interviewing each other right now. Just with so that's been a pro. The cost wise has definitely gone down. But then the con comes with that. My program for pulmonary critical care alone, we have 6 pulmonary critical care spots and we've had 667 applicants. So around 100 applicants per spot, which is crazy and wild. I think just in general with COVID, it has really shed a light on pulmonary critical care. So a lot of people are thinking about it in the back of their minds. They're like, oh, wow, these people were literally in the ICU. These people are taking care of the lungs of all these patients with COVID. So I definitely think that it shed a lot of light on what the field does. So I think that's kind of cool, but I'm also a little biased. So basically, when I was interviewing, like I said, I went to around 20 interviews for internal medicine. Now, these interviews were all over. I didn't really specify myself to a certain spot. I didn't have any ties that really connected me anywhere, though I am from Florida. I obviously wanted to stay in Florida. So there's a lot of things that you look at when you're going into the interview process and just when you're considering programs to start. One thing that you're going to consider obviously is going to be your specialty. Your specialty is what you want to do, whether it's internal medicine, whether it's psych, whether it's derm, whether it's neurology, whether it's surgery, whether it's anesthesia, internal medicine, family medicine, whatever. I do know a lot of people sometimes will apply to a couple, like they'll do peds and IM and FM and psych and see whatever lands up. And that's fine too. The only tricky part that I see in that is you need to get rec letters from each specialty. So if you're going to do pediatrics, IM, and FM, then you need good rec letters to really show that you are capable, that you care, that you have passion for each of those fields. Because if you try to play someone, if you try to go to an interview for peds, but you really want internal medicine and peds is your backup, they'll know. They'll see right through it. You have to really have passion for what you want to do. And I mean, it's hard. Residency is residency. It's not the easiest thing by any means to get into, but kind of just understanding what each field is about enough to speak and be articulate on it is really important. And also have an example of what drew you into the specific field that you're going into. I think that goes a long way with the people who are going to be interviewing you. They like to see that you care. They like to see that you remember certain things, and they like to see that you have it, that you have the field always in the back of their minds. So when I first was interviewing, the 20 places that I went for internal medicine, a few of them were in New York. I would say the New York ones, the Northeast ones, were the ones that did ask actual medical questions. So I was in maybe Brooklyn Hospital or a couple other hospitals specifically that I remember. And they actually sat in front of you and they're like, okay, so first, all interviews you go to, they're going to have your CV pulled up. Whether it's for residency, whether it's for fellowship, whether it's for a job. I just had an interview for a job last week and they had my CV in front of them, which is what they did in fellowship, which is what they did in residency. So they always have your CV in front of them. So if they have your CV, you better make sure you know your CV back to front. So if they ask you, oh, in 1998, you did XYZ, you better remember that you did XYZ in 1998. And sometimes they'll ask you a little bit more about that specific thing. So just be able to talk about what you put on your CV. Don't just make something up and put it on your CV because your friend did it and it looks good. Because they will ask you, and it's a small world, so everybody knows everybody. So that's one big thing. Always make sure that you know your CV. No matter what specialty you're going into, no matter what you're interviewing for, they're going to ask you that. So I was sitting, this was back in 2016 when I was interviewing for residencies. My last year of fellowship now. So 2015 to 2016, early, I was interviewing for residencies. I was in New York and the program director, he was interviewing me and he asked me, okay, so let's say you get this EKG. He shows me an EKG. And he's like, what would you do? I was like, oof. Well, that was caught off guard. It was a very obvious one. They're never going to ask you something that's completely out of this realm. They're going to ask you something that they think that you should know, and at that level you should know. It won't be something like cardiogenic shock. What are you going to do? It won't be something like that. It'll be something pretty straightforward, like there was STEMIs all over the EKG and you could tell that this was an MI and you activate cath lab besides starting the treatment. But so it's something like that. And they're looking just to see, are you quick? Can you think on your feet? Are you going to be that resident that can answer a code right away, make sure the patient, just essentially just doesn't die. So they like to see that. So don't be surprised if on the rounds that you go to for your residency interview trail that they do ask medical questions. I think that in internal medicine specifically, I can't speak for the other specialties, but internal medicine, I do think that's fair. It wasn't only that hospital that I got asked actual medical questions on. It was about 6 hospitals that asked actual medical questions, whether it be a certain scenario, what would you do next? Whether it was an EKG, whether it was a clinical scenario that they actually played out and then said, would you do this? Would you do that? How would you handle it? So that's another common question that they like to see is teamwork. How do you work with other people? Because medicine is not just one person. Medicine is a team effort, whether it be the doctor, the nurse, the PA, the pharmacist, the respiratory tech, the physical therapist. It's all together. So they want to see teamwork. They don't like it when their residents don't get along with their nurses. They don't like it when the nurses don't get along with the residents or XYZ. It all takes time and effort. So they'll ask you a specific scenario. I've seen that on almost all of my interviews as well. They like to know what you would do and hone in on would be, what can you tell them about yourself? That seems to be a question that never goes away. How do you see yourself? So make sure you have an answer kind of right away for that one, and one that's not super generic, but at the same time, one that's not super specific as well, that they can tell that you sat there and thought about when you traveled to this, when you did that. That question is asked a lot, very frequently. And then another one is what made you pursue what you want to do? Whether it be like a tale from your life, whether it be like a family member in trouble that kind of opened up your eyes to medicine, whether it be a specific time where you saw somebody, whether it even be a show that kind of motivated you or interested you. Just make sure that you have that also in the back of your mind, questions that they can ask you in regards to what makes you do what you want to do. So I think that those are very common questions that you will always get. What made you do what you want to do? That's a very big given question. Be ready for any internal medicine clinical scenarios. But as you're studying for your step 2 CK, they'll ask a lot about that. Not specifically a score, but they'll just ask you scenarios like from that. So if you're already studying for that, which by time of internal medicine residency interviews or any type of residency interviews, you should have already gone through your steps. So then you will be on a right mindset to be able to answer those questions. And then another one would be, what would you do with teamwork? Teamwork is dream work. I'm seeing a few questions. I'm going to answer them along the way. I saw one that said, can you please share an example of how they assess teamwork abilities? Yeah, they'll ask you, okay, they'll say a nurse paged you at 2:55 a.m. for asking you, does this patient need to be NPO? And this is after you have gone, or you're in a code, and the nurse pages you, but then pages you again, then pages you again, and then decides to email your supervisor. How would you handle that situation? Obviously, if you're in a code, you're going to be pissed and not even looking at your pager. But then when you realize that, I don't know, somebody went behind your back and actually emails your chief or your program director, that's going to make you look bad. So you're not going to be happy about that. But you got to handle it in a way that doesn't make you look bad for getting mad, but at the same time, kind of appeases the nurse too. So there's going to be a lot of situations in medicine throughout your course, your trail, where there will be some discrepancies where you won't be happy, whether it's paging every single moment, your pager just nonstop, whether it's somebody asking you a question when you just told them the answer. It's going to go long and far to keep a good, strong patience level, I would say. You learn quick. What should an IMG expect in an interview? Yeah, I am an IMG. I don't think it's any different than American grads per se. I do think that they might have, maybe they'll have more time, maybe they'll have something else to speak about, but IMGs, I think, have invaluable lessons and experiences and just a lot of things to speak about as to how you got to where you are today. I think that when you do go through an interview, I think it's important for you to speak about, if you were in a Caribbean school, what put you in the Caribbean school? Because they're going to ask you that. They're pretty candid on these questions. Like when I was interviewing, all of my internal medicine interviews, which was around 20, they asked me, so why did you go to American University Antigua? Like, why AUA? And then they were very candid and open about it. They're like, was it your scores, your MCAT scores? Was it your ACT scores? Was it your grades? They want to know that. They want to know that because they're going to ask it. So you should be ready. And there's no point in lying. If it's your scores, then say it's your scores. If it's your grades, then say it's your grades. And that was a certain point in life, but everybody moves forward. Everybody moves on. Grades from undergrad don't define you now. And the fact that you were able to get to a residency interview won't mean will mean way more than them looking at your undergraduate one class that you failed or something. I was very candid with them. I did tell them that it was a mixture between the pressure I had, the grades, or my grades, and my scores. So my scores were average. I was able to get into a few schools here, but they were DO schools, and I kind of just chose Antigua because my cousin had gone to Antigua and then she came out and really liked it. And I was like, well, this seems cool, going to school on an island. So I did tell them that. I told them it was a mixture of my school. It was a mixture of my work lifetime balance at that time was not good. But I showed them that I've grown from that, and I gave them the examples of certain things that I did in between. Like I was a scribe job. On your shelf exams, if you do well on those, you can tell them that you've been doing well on your shelf exams. If you have something to show in between, any research projects that you do go a long way. And the reason research in medical school goes a long way is because programs like to see that you have a background in research, that you know how to write a case report, whether it's just something simple as that. So if you come into a residency interview and you're like, oh, okay, so I submitted this case report and I presented at this presentation or this SCCM or CHEST or ATS or ACIP, that will hold a lot of weight, and program directors will like that a lot. It makes you stick out. So that's one thing that I will say if you guys have time to try to get in some research, that definitely helps. Now, another question that I think is super important to kind of go over, somebody had asked it, will they ask us to come up with a quality improvement idea or project on the spot? So that's actually a very good question. I think that might be one of the reasons why I was, I guess, a pretty good candidate. I have a lot of ideas for just improving medicine in general. And I told them that. I was very candid with them, the program directors. I was like, me personally, I have a lot of ideas that I think that medicine can improve on. One of them being, because at that time I was in the ICU. I was doing a lot of ICU rotations as a med student. I was able to do 3 at 4th year. I did set them up myself. So I went through HR and was able to contact them, to contact my school to set that up. But when I was interviewing, I was like, so I'm in the ICU. I see that there's a lot of delirium going around with patients, and it's so hard to get them off drips. So I thought about music therapy, and I brought that up to the program directors, and they're like, wow, no one's ever come up with something, thought about it enough, and spoke to us about it. That's different. So if you say something like that, or just if you have an idea in the back of your mind that you want to improve medicine, that you want to do while you're in residency, that goes a very long way. Whether you want to improve their social media so people can become aware about things, whether you want to bring awareness to public health aspect, vaccinations, just something extra, because otherwise what's going to separate you from the person right beside you, or the person who is in front of you and the person who's going to be behind you. That's the biggest thing these days. You have 100 people competing for one spot. It's crazy. And I think it's getting harder and harder, and just more and more people are applying. Not that that's a bad thing, because America, the world needs good doctors, but it's just, you need to know how to kind of handle and navigate your way through situations. Programs are always looking for the next big thing that's different, a person that can handle residency. They don't want somebody that's going to drop out midway. They want somebody that's going to represent their program. They want somebody that's going to give them good scores, that's going to graduate well. Will they ask us why we chose a Caribbean school instead of a US DO school we might have gotten into? They will. They'll say, well, if you have the option, why didn't you apply DO? I have to be candid about it. If you don't have a good answer for that, then, or if you're not able to answer that, you can say, at that time, I felt going to a Caribbean school would give me more opportunities, would open up would just open up my choices and options. If they ask how specifically, then you just say, if you're put on the spot, then you kind of just say, you can use an example if you have like a family member that's gone through this, that you feel like you can say that kind of guided you. You can say, at that time I was not aware. You can just be kind of candid and be like, I wasn't aware that even though that was an option, I felt MD would open more doors. Yeah, it's more about being open and honest. And plus, you already went to where you went to. So at this point, it doesn't even really matter what you say. Just make sure when you do read, when you get your interview letter, just make sure that nobody's a DO if you're going to say something like that. So when somebody offers you an interview, they're going to give you all the list of who you interview with. And if they don't, you have every right to ask them. Before my 20 interviews, I asked each program coordinator to send me a list of everybody who I'm going to interview with. And then what you do is you take that letter that they give you or that email, and then you can Google each person before your interview, because a lot of these people could be published. They could have certain hobbies that you might connect with. They might have their own blog, for all you know. They might be like really cool, and then you can find something to connect with them during the interview. They like that. They absolutely love that. If they see that this person's relatable and this person actually took the time to look me up, they're like, oh, wow. So make sure you keep that in mind. That's huge. And then more than likely, they're going to ask you questions off of what they do. For example, when I was interviewing for, I think it was the University of Connecticut for internal medicine residency, the program director, he was very well read and versed in arts, ARDS. And then he was one of the authors of one of the studies. So he was asking me a lot of questions on ARDS, but I already know he was probably going to ask me that because I had looked him up before. So I knew his papers, and he was happy that I had done that. He was definitely happy that I had done that. I think that will give you a lot of points, a lot of the ways. Does it matter what Caribbean med school did you go to? Will it matter while applying for matches? Nope, not at all. I've seen people from Xavier. I've seen people from schools that people haven't even heard of. And they do fine. We have somebody who came from China for med school, and they did fine. Honestly, once you complete med school, everybody's on the same playing field, because the person from China could get way higher board scores than the person from Harvard. It really doesn't matter what med school you come from. Everyone's on the same playing field afterwards. What is the best time to send letter of interest to programs? Can you please touch on the major component to be included in letter of intent? Best time to send letters of interest. So now is the time when you should be hearing back from programs. And if there's a specific program that you really want to go to, whether it be your hometown or whether it be something that program can offer you that other programs can't. Like for me, the reason I chose Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, was for their critical care. Their doctors, their attendings there are very, very well-read, very research heavy on all the big critical care topics. So I was like, this program can offer me exactly what I want. And in my letter of intent, I actually did email the program before. And I was like, this is something that I really want to do. I was able to do three rotations as a student in critical care, and I really enjoy critical care. I see myself doing this, and I think this program will help me with we're working with these people, these attendings, and I gave specific names. I was like Dr. Gomez and his macrophage activation syndrome, Dr. Keller and his sepsis research. So I was really specific. I think I did that before I got the interview because I wasn't getting the interview and I was getting really nervous. So it was like, I think early November, and I was like, oh my God, I still haven't heard back. So mid-October is like when I started emailing. But that was like kind of pretty early now looking back. Also, everything got pushed, I think, every year after, because I know fellowship applications got pushed because we're interviewing now for fellowship, but those got pushed. So I'm assuming everything got pushed a little later. So I wouldn't say you don't need to start right now, but I would say start a little earlier rather than later, because usually for residency, they have 3 cycles of invites. There's a first cycle, then there's a second cycle, then there's a third cycle. And the first cycle, in some programs, they only have 1. In some, they have 2. And they just interview until they fill their rank list. And they'll start their rank list based off people that they like. So if they interview you, they like you, they put you on the rank list. And then it just kind of goes on like that. But if you haven't yet gotten a lot of interviews like you've wanted, you still have plenty of time for now. So other things, I think this year specifically for everybody that's interviewing this year, they're going to be virtual. So things to think about that I didn't think about before, but I'm seeing it now as I'm interviewing people, and last year as well, because of the pandemic, it's all been virtual. So some things to consider and remember. It's very hard when you're interviewing with somebody and somebody's talking, then you're talking. So I always would pause and let the other person finish before talking, so then you're not talking over each other, because that can be very awkward. So you just want to take like a little pause, whether it's you taking the pause or you see that person kind of stopping to take the pause. Make sure that's there so nobody's talking over each other. Another thing that people completely forget about is internet. So you need good internet. You can't be in a place where it's spotty. People will tell you that doesn't, like, they'll be like, oh, it's not a big deal, but it really is a big deal. I'm not even going to lie. Being on the other side, if I'm interviewing somebody and like you knew about this interview and then you're not in a spot that has good Wi-Fi, I'll be thinking in the back of my head, you knew about this interview. You know what I mean? Unfortunately now, if it's a whole other ball game, like you're stuck in the hospital, then that I get. If it's a natural disaster, like it's raining out, hurricaning, and the power's going out, then that's another story, which we did have 2 people last year have that issue. And those we completely just moved. We're like, okay, you're having this going on in your hometown. Let's move it to next week. And I think that just makes more sense rather than you telling me, okay, let's plan for this time and then wasting all of our time. You know what I mean? So just make sure you have good internet. That's key. People will tell you otherwise, but it really actually does matter. Do you recommend scheduling interviews early versus later? For example, would they remember someone early October versus interview in January? That's a really good question. I wondered the same thing myself. I think if you leave a good remark, you make a good impression the first time, they're going to remember you. Like even as I'm interviewing fellows now, and I was interviewing people for residency, if I interview somebody early on and they were like stellar or there's something that I remembered about them specifically, I would be like, wow, I still really remember that one person, or like, wow, that one person really really just sparked all of our attention, or that one person had great conversation, something like that. So I don't think that it really matters much of will they remember, because I definitely thought the same thing. I was like, I need them the latest, so I will be the last one. But at that point, you get very tired. So the interviewees, like the people who are interviewing people, get very tired. So then they might not focus as much. There's a lot of pros and cons to both sides. I would say whenever you happen to interview, whenever you're able to, don't forget that as much as the programs are looking to hire people, you're looking for a good fit for you. Never forget that. The programs will be lucky to have you. So don't ever like hold yourself under a program. Always sell yourself, be confident. Those are huge. So that being said, I would say whenever you have time to schedule your interview, do it, but do it with a twist. Like go in there very confident. Try to get something, or try to think of something that you can say to them that will make you remember them. A few things like we talked about, definitely get the list of people you're going to be interviewing with, Google them. Think about something you want to do in residency that would help, that'll help you kind of stand out. Something you want to do in residency that will put you above. When I was interviewing, I said, I want to be chief. I said, I want to improve this program. I want to improve this program by all programs, like across. And of course, I didn't do that, but it's cool to say it. I want to improve program by creating more leadership or more open communication between administration and residents, more resident wellness. Everybody's about wellness these days with COVID. It's huge. So doing things like that, more resident wellness retreats, resident spa, resident room. We had a resident room, which was actually made by somebody, one of the residents in my residency. It was just like a meditation room. And they had like a little gong, a little massaging chair, a TV with just music. So if you go in with some idea in mind, that definitely like puts you apart. If the internet is bad in the area in which you live, which public places do you recommend that are appropriate enough for interviews? The library has good Wi-Fi if you can get one of their private rooms upstairs. Sometimes they have like those study rooms. So if you can book a room, I would say try to book a room in the library. That's always a good option. Otherwise, if you have friends in the areas that have good internet, I would hop on their internet. But I would do something that was going to guarantee you good internet. Like here, I think my internet's good enough, so I would guarantee myself good internet. I would take the chance and do it here. But I wouldn't move because like this specific spot is good, but if I move that way, then it might. I would say practice before. Before an interview, it's always good to practice. Practice meaning it's a little weird online. I'm going to tell you, some of these interviews, when you're silent, they're silent, then we're all silent. You're kind of like, okay, now what? So there are definitely times like that because everyone's either questioned out, which you usually are by the end of an interview, just questioned out. But it's just make sure you have talking points. So because it's virtual, you can always just have your laptop like that. You can have a piece of paper by you and then just like write down all your information, your questions, and quickly glance and ask. So make lists, make questions, use those questions over and over. Ask every program you go to questions. Don't let them get off the hook easily because you're interviewing for them. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So you want to make sure you go to a program that, I guess now we can talk about going to programs or what to look for in a program. Because like I said, just as much as they're interviewing you, you're interviewing them. I think a big thing that you should look for when you are going to a program is the people in the program. Who's interviewing you? How do they look? Do they look happy? Do they have big black circles under their eyes and they look miserable? They're irritable? Because I've seen that. People in the New York programs, a few of them, they just look like they just want to hurry this up. And they're probably here because their program director made them or their chief made them. They were next on the schedule to talk to people. So if somebody's talking really quickly and they're just like, okay, yeah, do you have any other questions? Okay, all right, cool. Then you can tell that they're not very they're not very happy there. Usually if you can kind of get a reflection of people, I think that goes a long way, because if somebody's happy in their program, then that more than likely means you'll be happy in your program. And who you work with is huge. You don't want to work with a lot of people who are all on edge all the time, who are trying to compete with one another. They're like, no, I want this option. No, I want to be chief. Like, that's just super hostile environment that we've all already been through it with med school. We don't need to keep on going through it. So I think that's really important. Other things to look at are the faculty, how much teaching is involved. Teaching is a really big deal that in med school, we get so much of it that we're like, okay, obviously we're going to learn, but it's surprisingly it's kind of surprising how much it's possible to not learn when you're just so busy with clinical duties. If you're, oh, God forbid, if you're taking your own IVs or transporting patients yourself, then like that's not teaching you anything. And then what kind of patients are you getting? Are you getting very complex patients, or are you just managing social work on the floors? Because if you're just managing this homeless person doesn't have a place to stay, that's not learning. You need patients. You need to go to a hospital that has a wide variety of clinical cases, whether it's like infective endocarditis. If it's in the middle of the city, you're going to get like a bunch of stuff. Those are cool. Those hospitals have the best learning, because they're always in the middle of like a hub in the middle of inner city. Patients who just don't go for themselves get a lot of care. I think that that's very important for your learning. Also, protected teaching, protected study time. Protected study time is huge, because you'll be so busy. You'll be worrying about your patients. You'll be having ambulatory clinic. You'll be just always thinking about your next clinical duty, your next ITE you have to study for. So you want to make sure that you at least have some time for clinical duty. You want to make sure that your faculty teaches. That's a big key point. I know when you're on rounds and you're like, okay, I have to do this order, that order, this order, finish my notes, talk to the social manager, get these patients out, do admissions. You're not thinking about teaching, but even one small thing from each patient every day will go a long way, especially for your ITE. So you'll be learning on the side without even knowing you're learning. So that's always the best learning. What's something you've seen in an interview which you would not recommend to do? I think arrogance, talking about yourself so much that you're like super egotistical. I remember I did have somebody that I interviewed, and they just like kept talking about all their accolades, but like over and over, to a point where we're just like, okay, that's great. And like the person was talking over everybody else. So it was like a group. So when you interview, they'll put you all in like a group, a virtual group room, like kind of in Zoom when there's a bunch of people. And then they'll have you go one-on-one, and it will be like a panel. So you have like 3 boxes up with a few different people, whether it's the program director, the associate program director, and an attending or something. And then they'll ask you questions. So that's what we've been doing. And I know that's what we do for our internal medicine residency program as well. So I would say don't be super arrogant. Like, don't come off as confident. I know there's a fine line. Come off as confident, but don't come off as arrogant. There's a fine line between sounding egotistical and then sounding confident. But I think that it's different when you're not constantly talking about yourself and you're not constantly talking over the people around you. You're being respectful. I think that's very important. Do you recommend interviewing on a phone or computer? That's a good question. If you can get better Wi-Fi on your phone, you could probably do that. But usually I think they want to see you. So make sure that you are well dressed. That's another big component. At least for the top half, make sure you're well dressed. But you can do a phone. There's nothing wrong in doing a phone either. I did have one person do the phone. Does taking a year-long break to prepare for step 1 affect someone during residency interview? Like, would they point it out? Yeah, they'll definitely point it out. Any gaps you have in your CV, they will point out, and they'll ask you, what did you do? Why? But taking time to prepare, I don't think that's not a red flag. That's just, it is what it is. It's maybe something else was going on at that time that you were also taking care of. Maybe just needed the time, and just you were in the mental space where you needed a year. And there's nothing wrong in that at all. But they will point it out. So just any gaps that you have, just remember that they're going to point it out and be ready to answer for them. But also be confident when you do answer. Like, yeah, I needed that time. What kind of questions would you suggest not to ask them? I would say money. I mean, that's always a touchy subject. You don't want to ask them what the salary is. I didn't ask the salary. Okay. Other than that, what kind of questions would you suggest not to ask? I guess anything controversial would be kind of off the table, which you would probably figure is off the table. Otherwise, almost anything is fair game. It's kind of a little difficult if you can't ask someone something, because then it's kind of like, why can't I ask that? Like, what are you hiding? So I feel like you should be technically able to ask anything and everything, except salary. That's when it gets a little touchy. How much interaction is appropriate before the actual interview? Do programs expect a lot of talking while we were in the waiting room? Yeah, that's always a weird question, because we're going through it now and we're the people that you speak to when you're in the chat room. I wouldn't say, like, it wouldn't strike me for somebody who's asking a bunch of questions versus somebody who's not asking a bunch of questions. So you can put it that way. I would say in those waiting rooms are going to be your only private time that you're going to get outside of, like, where you won't be with the attending or program director or associate program director. So that's a time to ask the real question that you have, whether it's, another question that you should always ask every program you go to, if you could change anything about this program, what would it be and why? I think that's a big question. Like, if you were to ask me that for my residency program, I would say I would like more resident wellness retreats, and I would like more, I guess, teaching rounds with other specialties, other subspecialties like cardiothoracic surgery, like interventional radiology. I would have liked more of that. And more study time, I would say those. But that tells you kind of, it's a double-edged sword. It tells you what we don't have, but it also tells you what we can work on. And maybe that's something that you're completely against. You're like, no, I want cardiothoracic. This program is out of my head. Or like, I want to learn with them. So that's something that you can ask. You can ask in your interviews. You can ask during the waiting rooms, because we'll be honest with you. The residents that you will be interviewing with in that room will be honest with you. But I don't know how honest they'll be in front of a program director. I don't think that you have to talk a lot. I think people will be talking enough that you can just kind of listen. And if you have your own questions, ask them then. That's a very fair question to ask. What would you do differently? And another one is, would you choose this program again? For me, if you were to ask me that about fellowship, what I would choose differently, or what I would like to have done differently, I would like more study time. The problem with us is we had COVID during our fellowship. So a lot of it was COVID. So we didn't get to do as much interventional pulmonary procedures like lung biopsies because COVID for 2 years. So that would be something that I wish I could have changed. But yeah, what are the qualities that the program is looking for to be invited for an interview? It's a screening process. So there's the first screen process. What they screen you out on is going to be, did someone fail all 3 steps? That's a negative. And then the other ones are going to be like a certain score requirement that they have. And then those people will be screened out, because every program gets, these days, they probably get, for any position, there could be easily 100 people that are interviewing, if not more. For our fellowship, like I said, there was 100 people interviewing for each spot. There was only 6 spots. So it goes through a screening process. I was talking to my program director about this because he was getting super antsy. He was like, what do I do? There's so many interviews, or so many applicants. So he had the our program coordinator screen people out. So she screened people out, and then the end pile went to him, which was around 100. We only interview around 100 people. Even that's a lot. But it's a screen out process. So that's what's going to be that's going to be the first process of how they eliminate. And then once you get to, but that being said, if you happen to be one of those people that are screened out, but this happens to be your dream program, fight for it. Or at least try for it. Try to email. If you realize you wanted to go to, if you want to go to Henry Ford and you didn't realize that you said that you did not get an invitation, but your friends got an invite for the interviews. So you realize this program was giving out invites, but you didn't get one. Then email them and say, hey, don't say, hey, I know you're giving out invites, but just say, hey, I'm very interested in this program, and then give your reasons why to the program coordinator, and then see. There's nothing to lose. So you might as well. But otherwise, when you get to that last pile, the things that people will be looking for, one big thing that our program director always asks us as fellows in the beginning, and our program director from residency did the same thing, internal candidates, if we know anybody. So if you know anybody, if you know anybody in the hospital and attending, if you know a resident, if you happen to make good with a resident, and they give your name and AMC ID number, that goes a long way. Automatically, you're jumped to the top. So anybody, if you know anybody, that unfortunately in medicine it is what it is, and that goes a long way. So build your rapport with attendings when you go on your rotations. Build your rapport with residents when you go on your rotations. This is why they say when you're med students rotating, it's very important to build your connections now, because when you're doing things like applying, they'll be the ones to remember you. So the qualities that the program's looking for when you make it to that last level would be, what have you done to, what do you do to stick out? What can you offer to the program? That's definitely like a program director mind thinking. What can this person offer to the program? Are many programs filtering out applications based on the status of their ECMD certification? I think this was a thing in the past. I don't think so anymore, basing the status on their ECFMD certification. As long as you're in the process to get it and you've done all your rotations, you've done your steps, I think that should not be an issue. That's not on the first filter for sure. I think another thing, a lot of people do ask me, does step 3 help? And I definitely think step 3 does help. I think it's an extra added point to your interview or your application. The reason that I think so is because when you're in residency, in your first year, you're not going to want to, your program director isn't going to want to think that you have the burden of step 3 on your mind. If I'm a program director, I would rather have somebody who took the exam, got done with it, got it out of the way, compared to somebody who didn't, because then when they come in, they're going to have to not only juggle learning the hospital, learning the residents, or learning the new residents, learning to live on a new place, but also going to have to think about step 3 in the back of their mind. Now, that being said, it's not a game changer. It's not like, okay, this person didn't have it, I'm not going to even look at them. But I think it's that extra added bonus for some people who might need to beef up their applications. Any tips for interview at UPMC Pinnacle? UPMC Pinnacle. I would say definitely that one. That's a pretty hospital. Just kind of look up who you're going to be interviewing with. I think that's big, especially at UPMC. Look up who you're going to be interviewing with. They're very big on research. Try to think of any type of research projects, ideas, QIs that you want to bring up during your interview, and be like, this is something that I was thinking about that I thought would be very cool to implement during residency. Program directors will love that because nobody does it. Is there any way that after doing general surgery that I can get into neurosurgery residency further? Yeah, I think so. I mean, neurosurgery is usually its own straight path, so it might be a little longer. But I think that there is a way. I don't want to speak too much about it because I don't want to give you false information, but I do think you can look into that. Do programs like that you want to pursue training to serve locations that don't have enough doctors versus giving back to the program by staying at the residency location? That's also a really good question. I don't think it matters too much if you do stay at the residency location. They do like that. Okay, I have to take that back. They do like you staying in the same position, in the same location, and they're going to they will like to choose somebody who has ties to the area because the person will grow with them. Once somebody knows you, they don't want to let go of you, especially in medicine because it's hard to find. The turnover is so high. And if you're somebody they can trust, they see you grow up, they grow you in your medical education, then they want to keep you. So they do like that. They do like you staying at the spot. And if you're going to serve a location that doesn't have enough doctors, I think that's very admirable. So I would definitely bring that part up too, versus I would tell them both. I would be like if you end up in a or if you're interviewing in Illinois and you tell them that you want to stay within the hospital maybe for a year and then go somewhere that doesn't have, that you want to go help the world, help the community, help communities that don't have enough doctors by giving back. I think that that's a good balance. I definitely think so. And that's different too. Another thing that we had in our residency is that I thought was pretty cool is we brought medical care to homeless. So in Pittsburgh, they have a lot of homeless people, and we brought medicine to homeless. It was like homeless medicine, which is really cool. That's something that you guys should definitely bring up in your interviews. Does it matter if we schedule interviews earlier versus later? Yeah, we touched about that. Scheduling interview early versus later. I don't really think it matters too much as long as you make the impression that you're going to make. I thought the same thing when I was interviewing, that I need to be the last person they saw. But at the end of the day, it didn't really work like that. You make your impression and you make it known, and nothing's going to change that, whether you do it early on or later. And another thing is, if you do it early on, then just send them an email later on and be like, hey, do you remember me? I'm excited about the program, or I still remember my interview day from November. It was awesome. I really hope to see you soon in the future. So you can, if you happen to interview early on, don't look at it as a bad thing. Just send them an email later on, so that kind of jogs their memory of who you are. How does their rank list work? They add people on a rolling basis. Yeah, they add people on a rolling basis. Whether they move you around, that's different, but they just add people on a rolling basis. So can we email them after being rejected for an interview, or only while we're still waiting for a response? Once you've been being rejected, it's harder to come back from. If you're waiting for a response, then you have room to make way. But after being rejected in this cycle, that probably means that they're done. Which, I've had a lot of people go through this, and a few people who have needed to reapply the next year, and that's not a bad thing by any means. My sister, she reapplied the following year. I had a couple friends that had to reapply the next year. But what they did was what was like huge in between. What they did was they stayed at a hospital for 6 months, and they got to really know everybody in that hospital, the attendings, the people who worked there. They even tried to get into the program director's clinic here and there. And then when they reapplied, everybody knew them. So it was like almost unanimous. So I think that always keeping that in the back of your mind so you don't put so much pressure on yourself is huge too, because residency is such a pressuring time. What challenges may I face during residency? Yeah, there's going to be a ton of challenges during residency. The first one's just going to be learning it all. It's just getting reallocated to a new location. Since we're IMGs, a few of you I'm sure are, we've all been moving for like all of our lives, and nowhere has been home just yet. So just moving and finally getting situated is going to be a big deal. Learning the hospital is going to be another one. Realizing that you're part of a group now. You might have challenges with people who are in your class, in your intern class that you don't know. Challenges with nurses, challenges with administration, challenges with schedule. There's going to be a lot, but I think that's something that we will talk about in our next one. How do we format a mock interview to practice? Yeah, that's a good question. I think trying to, maybe if you're going to do it with a friend, or you're going to do it with somebody you went to med school with, or even a parent, if they're around you, or an older sibling, you can just have them ask you questions. Maybe drop some questions that you think they're going to ask you and have them ask you it. Do it through Zoom or FaceTime, because then they're seeing you, you're seeing them. That's how it will be on the interview day. And then kind of gauge it out, how they talk, how you talk, give a little bit of room so no one's talking over each other. I think that's how you can kind of format one. When the programs say they'll have no USMLE cutoff scores and will. Yeah, sometimes some programs say they don't have a USMLE score, a cutoff score, and they do. That's true. But it is what it is. I mean, if they have it, then they're missing out on you. Don't forget that. But then even if they don't, if they do, then always do something or have something on your CV that's going to stand out. And if you don't right now, then there's still time. And if you don't happen to this time around and it doesn't work out, then there's always next time. And if not, then wow them in your personality. If your score isn't like the best, but you're super capable of talking, you come off very good vibes, positive energy. Another question I just realized that they do ask is, how do you take feedback? That's a big one. Some people take feedback very poorly. Some people, if you tell them, you could work on your note a little bit more, you should put less detail, just be more precise, give more differentials. Someone might get super offended and be like, wow, why are you telling me that? But then somebody else could be like, oh, that's so great. Thanks for telling me. Those are two different types of people that you'll come across. Some people that think they know everything and don't want to hear back feedback, and some people who are happy that they got the feedback and are thankful for it so they can grow from it. And that's the people that matter the most. So if somebody tells you something, then you take it well and you learn from it. That they like to see that. And that can come off in the way you talk, in the way you answer your questions. So being a good person, I think, and portraying yourself well during the interview, regardless of your step scores, regardless of what's on that paper in front of them, that CV, goes a long way. If they like you in your interview, and then the CV doesn't even matter. Then it's just a formality at that point. Are there any good clinical clerkship agencies for third and fourth year of med school? There's FIU. I did that through AUA. I think they do take external clinical clerkships. So I would look into that. It's the FIU AUA program. Definitely Google that and look into it. Because I do remember we had people from all over during that. And it was a good program because you're still also with American students from FIU. And some of the networking connections there are great. When the programs say they don't have cutoff scores and will review the applications holistically, is it true? Oh, this is kind of going back to what we say. Now, some programs, yes. Some programs just don't have cutoff scores. They care more about who you are. A lot of these ones that care more about who you are newer programs. So if you're just a brand new program starting out, you need people just as much as they need you. You need them too. So they need to fill their spots. Otherwise, they look bad at the end of the day. So they really do look at your program look at your application as a whole. If any of you guys are worried about your scores or worried about your application, I would say focus a lot on focus on the new programs. They can really go a long way. A lot of the new programs, HCA are opening a bunch in Florida, a bunch through the Southeast. Those programs, they will look at you from top to bottom. Even if you email them, they really need to get people in. Are all interviews done on Zoom? Pretty much. Maybe Teams, Microsoft Windows Teams, but for the most part, we've conducted all of ours through Zoom. I know most programs have as well. So yeah, so make sure you have Zoom. How will the new USMLE score reports affect applications for 2023? That's gonna be a big game changer for in the next 2 years. I think so, and I think that it's just gonna be, since step 1 is just a pass or fail. They're going to put a lot of emphasis on step 2 CK. And I think that the step 1 part of the passing failing, it might have implications within just the applications. Do they sort these people out? Do they sort them out or not? What challenges we may face during residency? Yeah, I think we kind of touched on that one. Is it okay if I only do tele rotations and no in-person rotations? I can't travel and it's an IMG. That's going to be a tough one. Only tele rotations if you can't travel. If you have visa issues, I would say talk about that in your application itself. Maybe add that as part of the personal statement, and definitely give whoever you're going to interview with a heads up and let them know that before they ask you why you weren't able to do any in-person rotations. If that's a restriction, that's a restriction. If there's nothing else you can do about it. But your application will go a long way. If you have a lot of research on it, if you were able to get published, that shows a lot of courage and numbers and just strength in general. How important is point of care ultrasound as a technology available at the hospital? I think POCUS is great. I think that you should definitely ask that question. I think that it's going to become a game changer in the future. Everyone's going to have it. I have one right here on me, actually. It's the butterfly. I take this everywhere I go. This hooks up to your phone, so it's very convenient. And you could see fluid in the lungs. You can see if there's air in the lungs for pneumothorax. You can see pneumonia versus fluid, which is huge. You can do a quick fast exam. I personally think it's big, but I'm also a little biased with pulmonary critical care. I think you should definitely ask that. I think that's big, and it matters that you care, that you know about it, that you know what it is. Is previous internal medicine residency experience a good plus point despite a subpar step 1 and average step 2 scores? Previous internal medicine. Yeah, 100%. I definitely think having internal medicine residency experience, whether it be back home for some of you guys, whether it be even here, a transitional year, or was in residency and then got out and then coming back, I think that holds a lot of experience and a lot of importance, because you know what to expect. You know, going in, what it is, how to manage your time. I mean, maybe you'll learn more about it as the time goes by, but I think that holds a lot of weight. Sessions less than 10 minutes. How do such programs rank applicants because those interviews are too short? Yeah, with internal medicine residencies, I know that and some even family, they're really short. The sessions, if they're less than 10 minutes, which some of you guys will have, just speak something that's going to wow them. Keep it brief, but something that will wow them. They have to rank you. They don't have a choice with the less than 10 minutes. I would say really if they give you, because the way that they're going to start is going to be tell me about yourself. That's what they always do. That was my first ones for residency. That was my first whatever, our introduction for fellowship. That was my first ones for jobs. When the CEO was sitting in front of me, she was like, tell me about yourself. And she's like, I know this is generic. I know you've been getting this for the past 11 years of your life, but I'm going to ask you what everyone's been asking. So just make sure that's interesting, because don't forget that they're on the other side hearing the same thing over and over and over. So just be interesting. All right. Like, don't make stuff up, but just find something that's interesting about yourself and twist it. That will definitely go. That would be interesting. If somebody told me something like, my name is Pablo Picasso. I traveled from Mexico to Guatemala, and I did my Caribbean school in China. I came here. Something like that. I would be like, whoa, I would remember it. So just trying all the pieces of your CV, all the pieces of your life, just kind of put something together that will stick out. Because like I told you, just as much as you're going to be doing it over and over and over, on the other side, they're hearing it over and over and over. And that's why they restricted 10 minutes. What do you do if they ask you something you can't remember right away? I don't think that's a bad thing, because if it's on your CV and then they ask you, then I think you should know it. Because then it's a little fishy if it's on your CV and then you have to think about it. Like, sit there and think. Obviously, you have a lot on your mind, so I get that. Stressed. Sometimes stress can like blur our cognition, so I get that. But don't take too long to remember it. Go over your CV the night before. Go over your CV the morning of. That will help. And keep a copy of your CV on your desk right here, so then you can look through it too. And make pointers on your CV. Nobody will know. Nobody can see what's right here. So if you make little notes like, okay, so I did a presentation in 2016 at SCCM. And then did you speak on it? What was it about? They might ask more questions about that specific one compared to the presentation in 2019. So just make sure you're able to answer that on the spot. If you need to make notes on your paper, then do it. But if they ask you something like, what did you do in 2002 or in undergrad, that's not on your CV. They ask you something like, what was your leadership, or name a leadership quality that you have? Then take some time to think about it. If you need a little bit of time to think, then there's no harm in that. You can even go back to the question. But like somebody else brought up from before, that some programs will have a timer. So just kind of remember to think about everything that you can. What would be your advice to a 10-year-old FMG graduate applying this or next cycle? I would say that's amazing. I think that's awesome, and that you'll have a ton to talk about during your interview. And I think that you'll have a lot to bring to a residency program. And I think that will go a long way. Are programs being more lenient with the requirement for USCE, given that most cancel their electives during the pandemic? Yeah, they are. They definitely are. I've seen it with the residency program that we have at our place, and our family medicine program as well. I mean, there's nothing you can do. A lot of the rotations were canceled for the pandemic just because of the fact that it was. Even now, a lot of the away rotations are only, they're only giving them to people who are local. So all program directors understand that it's a mutual agreement. So I think that's important. Also, I think, I don't think they're doing site visits anymore. I don't think that adds really too much value. I do know, I heard in med school that does hold value if you do a site visit, because you're going out of your way to see the place. But hospitals, with COVID and everything happening, that's not a thing anymore. I just joined. Is it okay to write letter of interest at this time, or they are too busy reviewing the application now? I think it depends on for what type of if it's a program that you want specifically. I would write it early on. I mean, what's the harm? There's really no harm. Even if they don't see it, it's not going to harm anyone. So I would definitely write it earlier, so then hopefully you can get into that first cycle of interviews. They can read it and you can get into the first cycle of interviews. Because don't forget, the person that you're emailing is the program coordinator. It's not anybody else. That being said, the program coordinator is very burdened. I do remember our program coordinator, my 3 years of residency, was so overwhelmed with all the applications she was getting. But it's the time. They expect this. If you're not going to do it now, when are you going to do it? So just as much as you're worried about how they're going to be taking it, and you worry about, you worry about you getting in, you worry about you making sure that they're seeing it because you matter. Oh, you guys are so sweet. IMG old graduates with medical scribe experience. Yeah, I think that that's great. I think, honestly, I think that applying older or after a few years, after 10 years, after 12 years, I don't think that matters at all. I had somebody in my residency program who was 48. I know my sister had like two older people in her residency program that were in their mid 40s, one in their early 40s, one in late 30s. None of that matters. It's just what matters is, are you going to be a good team player? You have to have passion. They'll see that. And I mean, like I said, once you start interviewing, everybody's on the same playing field. Can we send a letter of interest more than once? So that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't send a letter of interest to one program again and again. What I would do is, let's say there's a program like that I really want. I would send a letter of interest to the program coordinator, tell them why I want it. And then if I get the interview, then I would send an email after. But I would space it out. Don't just do it again and again and again. You can definitely send your thank yous after the program, after your interview. You can send your thank yous, but then remind them who you are. If it happens to be early on, at the end of the process, like February, just remind them who you are, so then they won't forget. Phone calls versus emails for interest in a program. Which do you recommend? Their phones are going to be ringing off the hook. I wouldn't recommend a phone call. I would recommend an email. Plus the email they'll see. And some programs I remember when I went to, they printed out the letter of interest and they're like, oh, you said this. Have you written handwritten letters? I personally have not written handwritten letters, not only because my handwriting is horrible, but also because, I don't know why, but I just emailed. You don't believe me that my handwriting is horrible. Yeah, see, it's really bad. But my sister did, and so did a lot of my colleagues, and they actually liked them. It was really cute. The program coordinator was telling us how like somebody dropped off this like letter of handwritten letters, and they thought it was super cute. So maybe that does go a little way. Think about it. I think that if it's a program you really want, then go out of the way for it. But otherwise, don't waste your time. I missed the beginning of the session. Is being recorded? Will be posted somewhere? Yeah, we'll be saving this. Is branch switching from derm to IM? One PD suggested me to say that I'm applying to IM because derm is hard. He didn't believe that I'm interested in IM. That is a question, and that is something that if you are applying to 2 specialties or 3 specialties because you're trying to get in, people will maneuver through that and people will see that. But if you actually were applying to derm and now you're applying to IM, or you have passion for both, and that's totally fine. Nobody is to say that you don't have passion for both. If you have good letters of rec and you have you've done something in those fields, you have people that are vouching for you from the letters of recs, and they can't say that. So I don't believe whatever that person's saying. If the PD said that he thinks that you're just applying IM because derm is hard, then you confidently say, no, I'm applying IM because I actually and that you are passionate. Who should I be writing my letter of intent to, PD or program coordinator? I would address it to the PD, but I would send it to the program coordinator. How possible is it to balance family and career, or family and residency? In the beginning, I think it's tough when you're just getting your feet wet and you're just starting. I think that's a little tough, but it's definitely doable. A lot of people do it. There's nothing that's not doable. You can definitely balance family and career. Not every rotation is going to be 12 hours for 6 days. That will be floors, that will be ICU, and that will be nights. Things like rheumatology, cardiology, pulmonary, all those are like 5 hours a day. Clinic month is 4 or 5 hours clinic, and then you're out. Some months you won't have weekend calls, so it's definitely doable. I'm probably one of the biggest believers in work-life balance. If you follow me, you'll see. All right, guys. Well, I am actually gonna study some pulmonary. So if you guys don't have any other questions, I will be wrapping up. Our question answer sessions with residents one-on-one are in a group with other students interviewing. They're in a group with other students interviewing. They're not one-on-one. They don't have time for it to be one-on-one, but with the other residents in the program is going to be in a group. If it's when you're actually interviewing, it will be program director to you, but it will be paneled. So there'll be a program director, associate program director, and another attending, and then you. You'll see 3 boxes of 3 different people. And that's just time saving. Are any tips on what to not say during interviews for IM? What to not say? Your handwriting is strikingly similar to AF. Yeah, most people call it actually torsades, but I'll take the AFib. Our tips on what to not say during interviews for IM. Don't mention for internal medicine. You got to make sure that one thing I would say that if I was interviewing somebody for internal medicine, if they're telling me that they have this trip planned, that trip planned, they're focusing on time off a lot. I would kind of look at that maybe as a little kind of red flag. Like, you're here to work. I definitely believe in work-life balance. Sure, you have your weekend. Whatever you do with your golden weekend is your time. I definitely believe in that. But if you're constantly bringing up that, oh, by the way, I have my wedding here. My sister's getting married here. I need this holiday off. You're already starting to talk about things like that. That's a little bit of a red flag. But that being said, I definitely believe in asking about time off because I think that that's important, but not constantly over and over. Other things to not say during an interview. We talked about money, so asking about your salary is not the best thing right away, I would say. Asking about things like research is always good. Asking about benefits is always good. It's kind of hard because I think that you should have fair game to ask about almost anything, honestly. There shouldn't be anything that a program is holding back. Because then you're thinking, why are they holding that back? If there's like a scandal that happened, don't ask about that. For example, we had a neurosurgery residency program here and they got shut down, but it was because of their hours. But yes, like that's not something we would ask about. If the program director said he thinks you are a good fit, do you think they'll rank the person? Yeah, I do think that if the program director does say that, I do think that that it's higher on the list. Just because they rank the person, we don't know if they rank them 1 or if they rank them 100. So just ranking the program director is likely being vague if he says, I will rank the person. It's good, but we always need to bring it to the top. How to know which specialties are for IMG? I think that for IMGs, I think IMG can apply to every specialty. There's nothing that's holding anyone back. How competitive is HEMONC fellowship? As general, how competitive is fellowship in matter of step scores? On my interviews for fellowship, I was never asked about my step scores. So fellowship, they care more about your passion for the field than what your step 1 score was, than what your step 2 score was, and what your step 3 score is. Fellowship is a whole different ballgame. Because after residency, you can go and make $300,000. You can go and make $250,000 1 week on, 1 week off. The fact that you want to put yourself through another 3 years and go into something is big. So at that point, you are definitely interviewing them. They need you. Thank you for all your time. What did you say when asked, tell us about yourself during your IM residency interview? That's a good question. And even now, last week, when they asked me for my job, I was like, well, I am Nina C. I'm one of a kind. I'm originally from Florida. I did my undergraduate there. I went to American University of Antigua, Caribbean School for my med school. I was in Pittsburgh for my residency. I'm in Detroit for my fellowship, and I'm planning to make it full circle and come back to Florida. And then I kind of told them what I do. I gave them my hobbies. I'm Indian. I like to dance. I like to have fun. And then I did throw that I started a club when I was in undergrad, Children at Heart, just something out there that was different about me, that showed leadership skills and showed that I'm just not like everybody else. Everyone say thank you. You guys are welcome. What's the step score for pathology for someone who had a low step 1 score? Happens to be a forensic medicine resident. There's no score. Oh, it's a scope. Yeah, I think that pathologists are very much needed. The programs, there are only very few programs though, but it's very needed. If that's something you're interested in, I think, especially if you have a forensic medicine background back home, that goes a long way. Old grad, good scores, USC research, no IV yet. It's competitive, but hang in there, especially because you have research and you have USCE, you have good step scores. Start emailing people. Don't let it hold you back. What are they going to say? Not email you back? At least if you put your your name out there, your email out there, the fact that you applied out there, maybe they'll actually look at your application. Would you advise pursuing fellowship and then backtracking to residency? Some people do that. I've seen that a lot here for like nephro and ID. They'll do that. They'll do the fellowship and then do residency. I would say take your chances on residency first. See how much interviews you get. If you're not getting a lot, then that's something to consider, because then you're guaranteed a residency at least at that place. All right, guys, I'm going to head out. It was nice talking to all of you. My Instagram is NeensMD, NEENZMD. You can follow me there if you have any other questions or anything. Okay? Otherwise, good luck to all of you. Bye, guys. Also, yes, you can apply to FIU as a fresh IMG grad.